Well, good afternoon, everyone. I thank you for taking the time to invite me into your home. It's a real pleasure. I want to say to you Merry Christmas and Happy Kwanzaa and Happy Hanukkah. The Thanksgiving dinner my sister Kay fixed. She invited me out to her house with her family. And it was real cranberries. It wasn't out of a can. It was real cranberries, and she fixed them so nicely. They went so good with her stuffed dressing turkey. And it wasn't stovetop dressing. It was real, like Mama used to make. Oh, with the cranberries, the real stuffed turkey with dressing, the mashed potatoes and gravy, and the homemade noodles, the homemade dinner rolls. Oh, and the pumpkin pie, the apple pie, and the cherry pie. I hope that you enjoyed your Thanksgiving dinner as much as I enjoyed mine. Here we are, December 3rd, and I'm still boasting of how delicious it was. And I am thankful and grateful for God that He's given us a nice nation to live in like this, the nation of the freedom. And we have freedom. One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Praise the Lord. And I am your host, Dr. Richard Allinger, from the Newburgh Theological Seminary, Department of Theology, Division of Church History and Religious Education. And I teach church history, but before I can get into religious church history content, I have to make a few corrections when I misspoke in previous sessions with regard, first of all, to Virgin Mary. I had said that she had 3 sons and 2 daughters, in addition to being the woman that the incarnation of Christ through Bethlehem's baby Jesus would come. So Virgin Mary, actually, after she had baby Jesus, the Savior of the human race, she had 4 more sons and 2 daughters. So Virgin Mary had 7 children altogether, including Jesus. The 4 sons, many of them after Christ was glorified and resurrected, became pillars of the church in Jerusalem. But after his half-brother James was martyred in Jerusalem as bishop of the Jerusalem church after Christ ascended, the Holy Spirit moved Mary and her kids out of Jerusalem before the Romans came in and made it a bloodbath. They went to a city called Pella, north of Jerusalem. The Lord, God the Father, didn't want Mary's family and her children all to be wiped out. And then the second correction I have to make is I had misspoken myself in previous programs, and people told me, you said that Jonathan Edwards' sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, and Peter's sermon at Pentecost, this is that which was spoken of by the prophet Joel, that in the last days saith thy God. Well, some people said, you said these were the world's 2 greatest sermons, and we can't help but believe you've misspoke yourself, because surely you know that the Lord's Sermon on the Mount up by Lake Galilee, up by where the Sea of Galilee was at, he had everybody sit down up there and gave the greatest sermon that the world's ever heard, and that was in chapter 5, Matthew chapter 5. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God, and so on. That's the world's greatest sermon. And then Peter's sermon probably would be second, and then Jonathan Edwards, if not Stephen the martyr's sermon, would be third. Stephen was indicting the Jews for rejecting Christ so badly they stoned him to death, and he gave a good sermon too about what they were doing. And also Jonathan Edwards' Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God was a great sermon too. But the greatest sermon was Christ's Sermon on the Mount up by Lake Galilee. This is where Jesus also walked on water and spoke to the wind and the storm on the sea, and it ceased, and so on. There's many miracles up that way. there was a lot of trouble and heartache and pain and death and suffering in Jerusalem. So he stayed most of the time north up by the Sea of Galilee, and he only spent one night while in his incarnation in Jerusalem, and that was the night he was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, surrendering into the Father's will. They took him, and before he was judged by Pilate, stayed one night in Jerusalem in his whole earthly sojourn here. And then the third correction I have to make is with regard to the Congress's passing about 20 years ago, and back in 1996 and 97, the legislation that would make Juneteenth a national observance, and it awaits a president's signature to have that actually happen. We think that President-elect Joe Biden and his Vice President Harris, the first vice president one we've had since George Washington, will probably sign that into law soon, and we will have Vice President Harris and President Biden will sign that legislation that has passed Congress into a national observance law, and it will be like Columbus Day and other days of national observance to help people in America remember that day and be happy about historic moments in our history and noteworthy events. We don't ever want to forget our history. And so far, of the 50 states in the United States, 2 states still have not recognized Juneteenth as a state holiday, but all the other 48 states are on board and have recognized it and the importance of making it a national observance. And the 2 states that have yet to recognize it is South Dakota and Hawaii. And I misspoke myself and said of the 52 states, and there's only 50 states in the United States, so I thought that Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, or Bermuda had been annexed as 51 and 52, the 51st and 52nd state, but I was wrong. There's only 50 states in the Union. And if you do your research, under the Articles of Confederation, there were 8 different men who were presidents before George Washington. The reason George Washington is taught as the first president of the United States to our public schools children is because George Washington was the first president under the Constitution of the United States. Before the Constitution was drawn up and ratified, there was Articles of Confederation, and there were 8 men who were presidents before George Washington under the Articles of Confederation. A lot of times people have no clue of some of this history, and that's why we see the importance, our government, to make Juneteenth a national holiday, because it will help people understand, first of all, what that was and what that celebrates, and that's the Abraham Lincoln pushing the 13th Amendment through Congress and holding the Union together during the awful Civil War, and then abolishing slavery for 4 million Americans. That's what Juneteenth brings you to become aware of and appreciate. And that's why it's going to be made a national observance soon. We looked for President Obama's administration to do it, but it didn't get done. But it awaits a president's signature. Now, moving now towards church history, you know that the last couple that you that have tuned in the last sessions on Friday afternoon from 3:30 to 4:30 on channel 17 Comcast cable and on 600 on the AM dial from 5:30 to 6 o'clock Monday through Friday, and on Saturday from around 12:30 to 1 p.m. On 600 on the AM dial, my church history lessons are presented, and on the FM dial 92.1 at WFOV Flint Our Voices every Friday afternoon from 2 to 3 p.m. And then on Comcast cable, I've been talking in the last sessions about Bonhoeffer. This is the book. This is a picture of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And we know that the name of this book is Bonhoeffer, Pastor, Martyr. Pastor, Martyr. It's called by Eric Metaxas, Bonhoeffer, Pastor, Martyr, Prophet, and Spy in Nazi Germany. He was an underground Bible college teacher there. And as Adolf Hitler was coming to power, he was actually trying to get rid of the Bibles and all the Yiddish and Jewish literature, Hebrew literature, and get rid Germany and Europe of Jews and Christians. He wanted the German Lutheran Church that Martin Luther established 500 years ago to actually back during just before World War II and during World War II to apostatize into what he called Nazi theology, and they had twisted the scriptures around to mean just the opposite of what the Holy Spirit of God the Father in heaven intended. So that's why they had that twisted cross, the swastika, because what you did to the cross, twisting it into the shape of a swastika, they twisted the scriptures into their Nazi theology. And it just says, who better to face the greatest evil of the 20th century than a humble man of faith? Has Adolf Hitler and the Nazis seduced a nation, bullied a continent, and attempted to exterminate the Jews of Europe? A small number of dissidents and saboteurs worked to dismantle the Third Reich from the inside. One of these was Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a pastor and author, known as much for such spiritual classics as The Cost of Discipleship and Life Together, as for his 1945 execution in a concentration camp, and for his part in the plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler. And this was a picture of Dietrich Bonhoeffer on the cover of this book here. And because the setting of this book that I've been presenting to you on Dietrich Bonhoeffer involves not just Germany, but all of the continent of Europe, England and France and Italy. And as you know, I've been teaching in church history that there's approximately 2 billion Christians, 1 billion Roman Catholics, and 1 billion Protestants of every stripe. And there's different stripes of Catholics too. I've talked to you in recent sessions. And has a follow-up. It might be good to give you this resource here. This is called, you that are going to study religions, this is called The Nelson's Guide to Denominations. The preview, the primary resource for understanding and navigating America's Christian organizations by J. Gordon Melton, M-E-L-T-O-N, director of the Institute for the Study of American Religion. And the complete guide to American denominations and Christian organizations, Nelson's Guide to Denominations, provides the essential information for understanding the bewildering variety of Christian churches, ecumenical and cooperative associations, and parachurch organizations operating in the United States and Canada. It is a concise, convenient, and reliable overview of the basic structures of America's Christian religious community. It features an introduction to Making Sense of Christian Pluralism by J. Gordon Melton. It's a symposium on one of the common denominators of American Christianity, the acceptance and authority of the Bible. It's statistical data and analysis of changing shape of American religions from 1900 to 2050 AD, and historical and theological introductions to the major families of Christian organizations, ancient Catholic and Orthodox churches, the Reformation churches of the 16th century, Puritanism, evangelical pietism, 19th century free churches and contemporary evangelical movements, parachurch organizations, and cooperative Christian movements. Addresses, contact information, and websites for more than 500 denominations and organizations. This book can be found for a little amount of money on Amazon.com. Again, it's a good resource in studying the denominations, Nelson's Guide to Denominations. And then there's another book here, that's the Protestant side of the 2 billion, the billion Christians, and on the other side is you got the 1 billion Protestants, and then you got the 1 billion Roman Catholics. And this book here, Are We Together? A Protestant Analysis of Roman Catholicism by Dr. R.C. Sproul. And this will help you understand better the Great Divide. You're talking about a divide between 2 billion Christians of every stripe, Protestant denominations, and Roman Catholicism. Despite efforts in some corners of the evangelical world to paper over Protestant differences with the Roman Catholic Church, huge disagreements remain, writes Dr. R.C. Sproul in Are We Together? A Protestant Analysis of Roman Catholicism. He offers proof on how wide the divide remains on some of the key issues of the Christian faith. And as I shared with you some of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's observations, he wrote papers on Roman Catholicism himself. Before he was assassinated back in the 40s, he visited Rome and St. Peter's Basilica and so on, and had wrote his assessment of Roman Catholicism. And here Dr. R.C. Sproul is saying in this book that you can find at Ligonier.org or Amazon.com, Are We Together? And it just says nearly for 500 years after the beginning of the Reformation, enormous differences still divide Protestants and Roman Catholics. Yet some representatives of both sides are insisting that the two traditions can work together and that the divisions are being overcome at last. Many evangelical Christians are confused. Where should the line be drawn? In Are We Together? A Protestant Analysis of Roman Catholicism, Dr. R.C. Sproul takes his stand for the bedrock doctrines of Protestantism in opposition to the errors of the Roman Catholic Church. Dr. Sproul, a passionate defender of the gospel of justification by faith alone in Christ, alone by grace, cites the historical statements of the Protestant reformers and the Roman Catholic authorities, then references modern doctrinal statements to show that the Roman Catholic Church has not altered its official positions since going back to the Council of Trent in the 19th century. In light, now Ecumenical Council, EC1 and EC2, were the last ecumenical councils. I think EC2 was back in the 60s, and EC1 was after the Council of Trent. In light of this continuing gap, he writes efforts by some in the evangelical camp to find common ground with Rome on matters at the heart of the gospel are nothing short of untrue to biblical teaching. In Dr. Sproul's estimate, the Reformation remains relevant. Are We Together is a clarion call to evangelicals to stand firm for the gospel, the precious good news of salvation, as it is set forth in Scriptures alone. You will find here the counsel of a wise, faithful, and well-informed pastor. Dr. Sproul is passionate about defending the Reformation, not as a curator of a museum, but as a shepherd of Christ's flock, says Dr. Michael S. Horton, professor of systematic theology and apologetics, Westminster Seminary in California. So that would be a good resource book for you too, to complement or reinforce or help you resource and research some of the teachings that have been presented in my past church history sessions that can all be, they're all archived on YouTube, and All you have to do is just go to YouTube homepage and put Richard Allinger in a search box, enter, and all the previous programs can be accessed. If you're interested in studying theology and church history and religious education. And because, like, the book that I'm really coming out of right now is Dietrich Bonhoeffer's life and his life and times in Nazi Germany, and has a backdrop, you can go to Amazon for this book. It's called Roosevelt, the Soldier of Freedom by James McGregor Burns. And because FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was the president during the reign of Adolf Hitler and a wartime president. And just, I'm not going to get into this book too, but I would just say that Roosevelt, the Soldier of Freedom, copyright 1970 by James McGregor Burns, and it's accessible at Amazon.com. And he really, this book is voluminous. It's about 700 pages, and he writes around three themes of, and the first theme is dualism. The second theme is transformation, and the third theme is alteration. And what dualism he writes about is that Franklin D. Roosevelt was a World War leader. He was elected to 4 terms before the constitutional amendment limits presidents now to only have 2 terms. But he was such a popular wartime president and held our country together and defended it so nicely during World War II with the other Allied powers. They called him, the name of the book is Roosevelt, the Soldier of Freedom. And he was elected to 4 terms before the constitutional amendment limits presidents to 2 terms now. In addition to doing all that, he also brought about Social Security in 1935 before there was even a labor union for auto workers. And most of the older people thought he was the best president we ever had. My grandma thought he was, because it gave older people money to live on after they had retired from working. And also he laid the legal precedents at a federal level for the mandate for the protection of laborers to actually unionize, because many times people that wanted to unionize in labor were blacklisted or killed. So FDR legitimatized the coming together of people for labor union movements and so on. So he was a great president, elected to 4 terms, a wartime president also. But it's said that at this time of Adolf Hitler's rise to power was FDR. And FDR, as a young man, grew up in New York, around Manhattan, and he went to Harvard, and he was very educated. He was deeply divided man. That's why that's what dualism means. And one of the themes that this author writes around in this book, divided between the man of principle, of ideals, of faith, crusading for a distant vision on the one hand, and on the other hand, a man of realpolitik, of prudence, of narrow, manageable, short-run goals, intent always on protecting his power and authority in a world of shifting moods and capricious fortune. This dualism in the heart of America, and America's heart and soul, created a division amongst the American people themselves too, that President Roosevelt felt during his 4 terms, who were, the people in America were, in this dualistic feeling, were feeling vacillating between the evangelical moods of idealism, sentimentalism, and utopianism of one era, and older traditions of national self-regard and protectiveness and prudence of another. And so the theme of transformation, that was the dualistic theme. Then the second theme that he wrote around in this book of 700 pages was transformationalism, and the transformation of the presidency. It was during World War II in Roosevelt's third term, rather than in the earlier New Deal years. They call the New Deal years when he began to actually bring together Social Security and help laborers with giving them the mandate to have unions and so on. That's the New Deal. In Roosevelt's third term, rather than in earlier New Deal years, that the foundation of modern presidential government were laid. The courts sustained presidential curtailment of liberties, such as those of the Japanese Americans, and Congress was surly and prickly on minor issues, generally acquiescent on the big. Under the pressure of war, the president's staff proliferated the presidential press and had a wider role. The bureaucracy was refashioned for war. And then the third theme was alteration in American society. War is the forcing house of social change. World War II can cut deep into the bone and marrow of American life. My dad was in World War II, and his mother, my grandma, she thought that FDR was the best president we ever had. And the vast migration of whites and blacks, the growth of new culture of war at home and overseas, the creation of novel and omnibus war industries, especially the atomic and electronic. These and other developments set off revolutions in American society, and under that theme of alteration, showed a need of the stature of Roosevelt, the man under alteration. He picked up Woodrow Wilson's, the former president during World War I, before Hitler rose to power over on the other side of the pond. Woodrow Wilson's fallen banner fashioned new symbols of programs to realize old ideals of peace and democracy, overcame his enemies with sword and pen, and died in a final exhausting effort to build a world citadel of freedom. That's why the title of the book, Soldier of Freedom. He deserves renewal attention today, especially from those who reject the old ways of princes and demand that people and nations base their relations on ideals of love and faith. He was indeed, in all the symbolic and ironic senses of the term, a soldier of freedom. And that's kind of what the three themes this book is all written around. And it would be a good resource for you that would want to buttress some of the teachings of Bonhoeffer in Nazi Germany, because this was our president during that time. And it can be obtained on Amazon for a greatly reduced price. And then, before I share with you other excerpts from the Bonhoeffer book, I wanted to just refer to these two books. One written, it's called A Biography of Kissinger by Walter Isaacson, and then a book that Henry Kissinger wrote called Henry Kissinger, Years of Upheaval. I'll share them with you in the next section, so I hope you can get right back with me.
Capture your future at Mott Community College.
If there be time to expose through discussion the falsehoods and the fallacies, the remedy to be applied is more speech, not enforced silence.
Public, educational, and governmental access television is such a remedy, providing every community with a forum for free expression. PEG Access empowers every voice to be heard. It's the freedom to communicate, and it's only on cable.
Well, I'm so glad, ladies and gentlemen, that you could get back with me. I was just giving you a few books that would be good resource material to follow up on all of the history with regard to the rise of Adolf Hitler in Nazi Germany and some of the people that were a network of people that were involved even in his Nazi regime, secretly involved with other people networking all over the continent of Europe to eliminate Adolf Hitler. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer is the name of the book I was talking to you about. But before I get into excerpts from that book, to help you just kind of understand a little bit about what that book, Bonhoeffer, Pastor, Martyr, Prophet, and Spy, was all about, I wanted to share these two resources with you because it will probably give you better insight into what we've been talking about at a world war level, because Henry Kissinger was, in the Nixon administration, the former 37th President of the United States Cabinet. He was a Secretary of State. He also, like FDR, was educated in Harvard. Now, Kissinger, Henry Kissinger, he escaped Nazi Germany with his brother Walter when he was just like a teenager. Had he not been escaped, he probably, because he lost a dozen of his people, brothers and sisters, mother and dad, in the Nazi Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust. But he escaped, and as a young man with his brother to New York, and that's why he went to Harvard too, like FDR. But this book, Kissinger, by Walter Isaacson, there was just one observance on the cover of the book I wanted to share with you. It says, one of our ablest students of post-war United States politics and diplomacy has brought us to the most luminous and comprehensive life ever written of one of the towering figures of the 20th century. Isaacson's Kissinger is an absorbing work of vivid portraiture, tireless research, and provocative judgment. And this was the author of the book, The Crisis Years, Michael Beschloss. And that was what his assessment of this work, this biography of Kissinger, was about. And I just wanted to share with you a little bit of what the cover says here. It says that has his parents finished packing the few personal belongings they were permitted to take out of Germany, the bespectacled 15-year-old stood in the corner of an apartment memorizing the details of the scene. He was a bookish and reflective child with the odd mixture of ego and insecurity that can come from growing up smart yet persecuted. I'll be back someday, he said to the customs inspector who was surveying the boxes. Years later, he would recall how the official looked at him with the disdain of age and said nothing. Henry Kissinger was right. He did come back to his Bavarian birthplace, first as a soldier with the U.S. Army Counterintelligence Corps, then as a renowned scholar of international relations, and eventually as the dominant statesman of his era. Now, if you go back to the Old Testament, Daniel, the Hebrew prophet, was a statesman in Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar. Well, this is just like another Hebrew Jew. You know, Henry Kissinger was a Hebrew Jew like Daniel, the statesman like. And you should see the parallel from back before Christ when the prophet Daniel was in Babylon and made a statesman, and during the Vietnam War era, Henry Kissinger was elevated to cabinet status to be Secretary of State in the former 37th President of the United States, Richard Nixon's administration. And see, there's never been a man popularly elected in a presidential election from Michigan. Upon Richard Nixon's resignation from his presidency, his elected second term, protocol in the Constitution made Gerald Ford, who was a representative in the House, president. But he wasn't an elected president. There's never been an elected man from Michigan made president yet. John Dewey lived in Owasso, but he lost the election. He was never elected. Harry Truman beat him. So Michigan still has to have an elected president. We've never had an elected president. Gerald Ford was a representative elevated to the presidency upon the removal of Richard Nixon because Spiro Agnew was tied up and was not able to be the president at the time. And the doctor, George McCormick, Representative McCormick, Speaker of the House, he was too old in his 70s, and his health would not permit him, the protocol called, to be president in the removal of a president and the Speaker of the House. So they went to I think the majority whip, Gerald Ford, and he happened to live in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and be a representative there. So, and this is where he comes to know Henry Kissinger in a more engaged way. Henry Kissinger was right. He did come back to his Bavarian birthplace first as a soldier with the U.S. Army Counterintelligence Corps, then as a renowned scholar of international relations, and eventually as a dominant statesman of his era. By the time he was made Secretary of State in 1973, he had become, according to the Gallup poll, the most admired person in America. In addition, as he conducted foreign policy with the air of a guest of honor at a cocktail party, he became one of the most unlikely celebrities ever to capture the world's imagination. Yet Kissinger was reviled by large segments of the American public, ranging from liberal intellectuals to conservative activists, who in varying ways considered him a strange Lovian power manipulator, dangerously devoid of moral principles. Kissinger's power-oriented approach to global politics resulted in a messy conclusion to the Vietnam War that included the secret bombing and invasion of Cambodia and the Christmas bombing of Hanoi. Yet he was also able to design a triangular balance based on détente with Russia and an opening to China that preserved America's influence in the world. He had an instinctive feel for power, but it was not matched by a feel for the openness of America's democratic system or for the moral values that are basic source of its world influence. This book, the first full biography of Kissinger, explores the relationship between his complex personality, brilliant conspiratorial, furtive, and prone to power struggles, charming yet at the same time deceitful. and the foreign policy he pursued. Détente means a French word for relaxation of tensions. It draws on extensive interviews with Kissinger, as well as 150 other sources, including Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, H.R. Haldeman, former South Vietnamese President Nguyen Van Thieu, and Russian diplomats, cabinet colleagues, disillusioned aides, childhood friends, and business clients. In addition, it makes use of many of Kissinger's private papers, personal letters, recorded telephone conversations, his desk diaries, and those of various officials, memos of classified meetings, and transcripts of the FBI wiretaps. The result is an intimate narrative filled with surprising revelations that takes this century's most colorful statesman from his childhood as a persecuted Jew in Nazi Germany, through his tortured relationship with Richard Nixon, to his twilight years as a globe-trotting business consultant. He soon will be 100 years old. He's in his 90s. And he did have, I think, a bypass heart surgery in the year 2000 up in New York. Like I said, this was written by Walter Isaacson, a biography on Kissinger, and then throughout the book there are like photographs of 1922 pictures of his mother and dad living in Germany before Hitler came to power under the Kaiser, and then the home where he lived with his Kissinger family. But more than a dozen of his brothers and sisters and parents were exterminated in the Nazi regime, during the Nazi regime. But he escaped to New York with his brother Walter. And then here there's a picture of Henry living in Germany before he left as a teenager. And it says that Kissinger in Fürth, 1931, a dutiful and bookish boy, he went to the synagogue every morning to study the Torah. His passion was soccer. After Jews were banned from public matches, he would often sneak into the stadium and risk beatings from the Nazi youth gangs. And then there's pictures of him in the United States military during World War II, and then all the government leaders. He went to all the government leaders on all 7 continents of the world with his foreign policy of détente, relaxation of tensions. All the leaders of the Middle East and leaders of Africa, leaders of Asia, South America. He captivated the imagination of everybody in the global community. And there were pictures of all that family history, and then what he did as a diplomat from the United States government. A good resource, and can be found for probably less than $10 on Amazon.com to back up, and it'll go good and complement our studies of Dietrich Bonhoeffer in Nazi Germany. And let me say that if you have any questions, ladies and gentlemen, with regard to church history and some of the material that I've been presenting, I would really want you to call me, and we can have conversations over the phone or email me. You can tweet me, Instagram me, or Facebook me too. If you have any questions, I would be more than happy to share further explanations of some of this material that I'm just haltingly presenting to you in the time restraints of this hour program. And then this last book has a resource, was called it's written by Henry Kissinger, called The Years of Upheaval. And just to give you a little idea of that, now to backtrack just a little bit, I talked to you about Catholicism and the billion people in Catholicism and the different stripes of the billion people in Protestantism. Well, I would just say that even though most Protestants believe that after Christ was taken off the cross, his dead body was taken to a garden tomb close to the Golgotha, or the place of the skull where he was crucified. But many of the denominations of other world religions, like the Coptics of Egypt, the Syrians, the Roman Catholics, and the Ethiopians, and Greek Orthodox, Byzantine, and Armenian Catholics, they're not Protestants, and they have built around the 12th century when Thomas Aquinas was the great theologian in the Roman Catholic Church, and he influenced some of the reformers with his writings in the 12th century when the 16th century Reformation took place. Well, around that time, 1,000 years ago, that's when all these different religions built the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, but that's not really the place where his dead body reposed. It was out by Golgotha where he was crucified, but it's just observed as the place that his dead body was, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but that's not the real site. And it's like, people think that Christ was born in December. No, he was born in October, and that is really what I think. In the beginning of the Christian movement, you had the true church and then the fake church, the false church. And the false church has different dates and different meetings of interpretation of doctrine and everything else. So in the beginning, there was two churches in Christianity. It was the true church, and they knew Christ was born in October, and they knew Christ was taken off the cross and put in the garden tomb. And that's why most of the Protestants believe that. But all these other people I've cited, they built the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in the 12th century, has a place where the dead body of Christ reposed. And they so believe this, they get down on all four and kiss the ground there when they go in. And it's open 24/7, prayers going on all the time there in the holy city of Jerusalem. And the Armenians, which are part of that construction 1,000 years ago of that Church of the Holy Sepulchre, their priests wear long black robes and pointed hats symbolic of Mount Ararat, where Noah's Ark landed. That's how you can recognize them. Now, Henry Kissinger, like I was talking about, that wrote this book, Years of Upheaval, he was a German-born Jew, and he escaped Nazi Germany when he was just a young teenager with his brother Walter, came to New York. And after being a world diplomat with his policies of détente, relaxation of tensions in the world, United States government representative, he wrote this book after he retired, and its copyright was 1982 by Henry Kissinger. And as I said, like the other Kissinger biography, this is full of pictures with Dr. Kissinger with Zhou Enlai and Mao Zedong and Brezhnev and President Sadat of Egypt. All the pictures. He went all over the world to all the leaders of all 7 continents. He captivated the imagination of all the world leaders, Henry Kissinger, European leaders, African, Asian, and then South America and Latin America. Here's pictures of him with Leonid Brezhnev and Yeltsin, Boris Yeltsin, and the Soviet Union, and he really influenced them to loosen up their grip on Eastern Europe. Kissinger was a very influential man. And then President Sadat, real quickly going through here, because I want to get back to the Bonhoeffer book, and he's there at the pyramids in Egypt. He's with President Sadat, and just to read this right here might give you an idea of Kissinger's writing this book. Voluminous, 1,038 pages, and toward its end he concluded all of this global trotting that he did, and pictures of all the leaders he spoke to and influenced. We had traversed during the Nixon years, as former President Nixon's Secretary of State, we traversed a constitutional crisis without catastrophe. Whatever was ahead of us could not match in peril the period of the collapse of our executive authority. See, like I was talking to you earlier, the Juneteenth legislation that has passed Congress for national observance, it waits for executive authority. The president signs it, the bill, and now Juneteenth will become a national observance. And people will know more about what that means, because there's a lot of a lack of awareness to a lot of Americans of what Juneteenth means. So he says that what he worked with other people in America to do during the time of upheaval during the Nixon administration was to avoid a constitutional collapse and a period of collapse and of executive authority. There's still authority in the executive branch of the federal government. Our federal government is three branches: the legislative, executive, and judicial, the Supreme Court. Somehow, we had preserved a vital foreign policy in the debacle, yet reflected also that one cannot engage with impunity in a flirtation with the nihilistic. No one had taken over the presidency in more challenging circumstances. Great crises were surely ahead. Yes, it was Kissinger that got United States out of, through his détente policies, the Vietnam War, which was a nightmare for America. I think 68,000 American boys, or military people, were killed in that war. But he ended that. He got us out of there. No one had taken over the presidency in more challenging circumstances. Great crises were surely ahead. And the prayer that had eluded me 2 nights earlier came to me as I watched Gerald Ford, he's a fellow Michigander, enter the White House for the sake of all of us. Richard Nixon resigned the presidency with honor because Congress moved with their 3 articles of impeachment to impeach the former 37th president dishonorably. There's only been one president impeached, and that was Andrew Johnson after Abraham Lincoln, the 17th president. And Congress would have impeached Richard Nixon, the 37th president, under the abuse of power, contempt of Congress, and obstruction of justice if he would not be given the alternative to resign with honor. And so I watched Gerald Ford, says Kissinger, in the conclusion of this book, The Years of Upheaval, written by Henry Kissinger. I watched Gerald Ford enter the White House for the sake of all of us. The fate would be kind to this good man, that his heart would be stout, and that America, under his leadership, would find again its faith. And again, a good book that would complement some of what I'm going to be presenting now with Dietrich Bonhoeffer in Nazi Germany. Now, getting back to the excerpts from the Bonhoeffer book, I will just say, as we conclude this session here in December, but at this point in this book here that I was presenting in previous session excerpts from, to just give you an idea about this voluminous work by Eric McTaxis, 700 pages. But at this point, Hitler's ascent to chancellorship was 2 years in the unimaginable future. Bonhoeffer had been in New York a mere 9 months, but in some ways it seemed a lifetime. And now, because you're talking about New York, I have to say that there is a website on the internet that shows the new construction of the United Nations building in Toronto, Canada under Premier Trudeau. They are going to relocate the United Nations in Toronto, Canada. That was what the 9/11 Commission after the 2001 terrorist attack advised. In addition to relocating the United Nations outside of the United States, because there's people in the UN networking all over the world that want to bring about they can't put America out of existence, but they can put a dent in America. So they're networking, and the committee advised that the UN be relocated up in Canada. So that's where it's going. And Bonhoeffer had been in New York, before he was assassinated at a young 33 years old. He came over, he went to Rome, and then he went to New York too. And he wanted to visit Mahatma Gandhi too before he died. Bonhoeffer had been in New York a mere 9 months, but in some ways it seemed a lifetime. When he left, the Nazis were a tiny gray cloud on the horizon of an otherwise clear sky. Now, back and crackling with now the clear sky became black and crackling with electricity. They loomed nearly overhead. They knew as Hitler was rising to power. Bonhoeffer wrote, Suits, that the outlook is really exceptionally grim as Hitler began to rise to power, especially from the eyes of a Jew. He felt that they were standing at a tremendous turning point in world history, that something was about to happen. But what? In his precinct anyway, they had a feeling in his immediate region that something was about to break out of something. Bonhoeffer sensed that whatever lay ahead, the church would be threatened. He wondered if it would survive at all. In other words, in Martin Luther's Lutheran Germany of 500 years, the churches in Germany under Nazism began to apostatize and cave in to Nazi theology, which was twisted. They had a twisted interpretation of the scriptures, which meant just the opposite of what the holy expositor of the written word really intended. And that's why the swastika, or the, twisted cross, became the symbol of the Third Reich, because they twisted scriptures too. Now, some of the people like Bonhoeffer and other Christians in Europe, they didn't cave into this, and they became resistance. They began to gather and network to actually put Hitler out and not go along with his twisted theology of Nazi theology. And so Dietrich Bonhoeffer, being a theologian in Nazi Germany, has other theologians begin to do. We see early on in this book of Bonhoeffer in Nazi Germany, because he was a Bible college teacher, but he was a theologian too, and knew a lot of the great theologians in Germany. And I've talked with you about Adolf Harnack and so on, and Friedrich Schleiermacher, the chair of theology at the University of Berlin. And so has the Church in Nazi Germany and the Jewish question, I mean, what are you going to do with the Jews? Well, how can church people, Christian people in good conscience, consent to, burning up the Jews and gassing them and so on? Well, what I'm going to talk with you later about is it became necessary for men like Bonhoeffer, who didn't want to cave into the church apostasy with the Nazi theology, is to, what is at stake here in the last minute? I'll share this with you, his statement, with the church and the Jewish question in Nazi Germany. What is at stake? By no means whether our German members of congregations can still tolerate church fellowship with the Jews. It is rather the task of Christian preaching to say, here is the church where Jew and German stand together under the Word of God. Here is the proof whether the church is still the church or not. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, because Christ died for both Jew and Gentile. That means everybody on the planet. And they say, if you're going to allow Hitler to burn books, the next thing he will be burning is people. And that's sure enough what he did. Now that's what the theologians said. And they wrote declarations about this awful apostasy, and I'll share some of that with you in the next section. So this is your friend Richard Allinger, bringing to an end our December session of Lessons in Church History, and I want to wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy Kwanzaa and a Happy Hanukkah.